been a blessing, and hearing Pastor Easton, and then Brother Mike will take over for a little while. So he's been rearing to go. He's been kind of on the sidelines now for a couple months. So we'll get him back in the saddle, the teacher. All right, so this subject is kind of putting some of the previous lessons together that I've been teaching. So you'll see a lot of the same familiar verses that we've been going to, but kind of maybe at a different angle, and that's what I want to look at today. So if I had a title for this, it would be the Three Timeframes. Three Timeframes, what are those? Well, we're going to look at what the Three Timeframes are. I'll read my introduction here. So looking at man's history, what are the three time frames? Hint, we're living in the third one right now, if you will. So what are the okay. So since the very beginning, God has sought a relationship with mankind. He created them male and female, separated from every other created thing. And with that came a free will. He didn't give a free will necessarily to the animals or something, right? We're made in his image, and we're different. So we can choose to love him or not. But in this relationship, man isn't free to decide for himself what God deems acceptable. It's like, I'm an employee, right? And sometimes I want to tell my boss what I think should happen, right? But that doesn't work like that. He tells me what is expected of me. And I signed my name on the paperwork that said, I'll do this, right? I will be a faithful employee and all this other stuff. And there's consequences if I'm not. I could get reprimanded, I could get written up, I could get fired, right? So I have to abide by the laws, by the terms. And so God's the same way. He's not just going to accept anything that people throw at him. He has standards. And so for all of eternity, God will surround himself with those who chose him in this life. And so, how important is that to think about? And so from start to finish, I'll just read these scriptures here, and then we'll kind of get into it. But just to kind of lay the groundwork that God has standards in order to offer him worship. He has standards. And so what is it? I'll read these scriptures. But he's made it clear that he requires his people to be separate from the world. So we're of this world, but we're not of this world. We live in this world, but we're not of the world. So I'll just read these. Genesis chapter 12. It says, now the Lord had said to Abram, of course, Abraham being the father of all these nations, the Lord had said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. And so right away, he's separating him, Abram, at the time, not Abraham yet, but Abram, he's separating him from his family because he doesn't want him to continue in the way that everyone else around him was living. So now we're separating out Abram. Leviticus 19. I put these in order in scriptures here. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to all the congregation of the children of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, for the Lord your God is holy. So there's a standard there that if God's holy, he wants those that follow him to be holy. What's holy mean? All it means is being separate, being special, right? Being different. You could put that word in there too. And so he's saying God's different than everyone else. We are to be different than everybody else, is really what he's saying. John 17, Jesus says, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. And so you see a difference between the way that Jesus lived his life and those that followed him versus, as he puts it, the world. And so there's a difference there. Acts chapter 2 says, and with many other words he testified and exhorted them, saying, this is Peter preaching, he says, be saved from this perverse generation, this crooked generation. So he's saying that if you're looking at the landscape and there's a lot of bad things out there, he's saying separate yourself from that and lead and follow the Lord, follow God, and you will be separate from those things. Those things won't trap you. Those things won't control you. Those things won't be your master, as it were. He's saying save yourself from that. And so there's a better way to live life. James chapter 4 says, adulterers and adulteresses, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Whoever therefore wants to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. So we're pitting these two ideas, aren't we? There's the way that God said, you're going to follow me. If this is the way that if you're going to follow me, this is the way it has to be. And the other says that the world says, okay, you can just do whatever you want. And things will be okay, which of course is a lie. 2 Corinthians chapter 6 says, therefore come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you. So once again, there's standards. I can't just make up what my day looks like, at work. My boss says, get this done. I told him the other day, I said, his name is Joe. I said, Joe, for you, I'll do that. I said, not everybody gets that treatment. If my coworker wants to tell me what to do, I'll tell him to take a hike, right? But my boss tells me what to do, I got to do it. There's a difference there. 1 Peter chapter 2 says, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who once were not a people, but now are the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. So God has put this special people who decided to follow him and say, look, you want to do it my way, there's going to be a reward for that. And so he's being called out, they're being called out, and they're being separated, as it were. And so these are the requirements. Of course, there's a million other scriptures that go along with that, but these are some of the requirements to serve God across all of man's history. Did you notice that we went from Genesis all the way to 1 Peter? So that encompasses thousands of years of man's history. And the specifics of what constitutes acceptable worship might have changed. I've had different bosses over the years. Some guys have emphasized certain things. I'll be like, okay, well, I need to emphasize certain things. Another boss comes in. I've had like 5 or 6 bosses. Another boss comes in and says, no, we're going to de-emphasize that, and we're going to emphasize this. Okay, we're going to really focus on customer service. That's my big thing. It's like if you have to put a project on hold to go help somebody, that's totally acceptable. We can do that. And the other one says, no, we need to focus more on the processes. It's like, okay, if they, the back end processes keep things running smoothly, that's what you need to focus on. And if you need to hang up on a customer, that's perfectly fine, right? And I have to please everybody, as in that moment, that boss, I have to do what he says. Next boss, I got to focus on what he said that he's putting focus on. And that's just the way that it goes, right? I mean, if you want to keep your job, and you want to get raises, and you want to be a good employee, you got to do that kind of stuff. I doubt that unless we're self-employed, that any of us can just make up our own rules, right? So serving God is no different. There's rules already set, and he says, you got to do it this way. And we got to do it that way. Let's do it. And so from the very beginning, as we talked about from Genesis, right? Remember, what's our lesson called? The 3 timeframes. Within each time frame, God says, this is the way you're going to worship me. And that's the way that's accepted. And then another time frame built upon the others to say, this is the way you're going to worship me. And that's accepted. And so we keep going, and now we're in that 3rd time frame, as it were. And we're going to get there. But here's what hasn't changed. The need to do it God's way hasn't changed. The specifics may have changed on our end. Overall, they want me to be a good employee, and I want to be a good employee. How that looks under each boss, as it were, is a little different. But the need to be a good employee hasn't changed. That's an overall need and requirement, really, to keep your job. And so we do see 3 distinct eras or methods or time frames that God has accepted worship. All 3 have always required. See, there's a common thread through all 3 of these. All 3 have always required faith and the need to stay separate. That's why we read those verses. What's been the common thread is faith. Even though, back in, Moses' time, he heard God's voice from heaven. Do we hear physically God's voice from heaven? No. But we live in the time frame after Jesus that says Jesus has come and he's spoken these words that we can read. And so we're in that time frame. So we can read all the written word of God. They lived in a different time frame. They didn't have those words yet. And before that, they lived in another time frame, pre-flood, right? So there's the 3 different time frames there. And so we see that those are 3 specific methods, different eras, and that's how God's accepted worship. But they've all required faith, and they've all required the need to stay separate, even if the method has changed. And here's the key to this kind of the second part of this lesson. Inevitably, people are people. We're going to mess up. We're going to fail, like Samuel's devotion, right? You fall down, right? But what I've noticed is that kind of toward the end of one of these time frames, people start to fall down and start to mess up and start to really turn their back on God. And what happens? God has to step in and rescue a group of people in order to keep his promises, because it has to continue, right? God said, my word will always be around as long as you're here. My word and my people will be on the earth. I got into this, I don't know why. I don't like any trolls on the internet. I don't do this. But I was looking this morning at a comment that I had posted. This guy posted a video on YouTube talking about Genesis chapter 6, and I don't know why I decided to throw a comment in there, but I did. And this has been like years ago. I decided to check it this morning, and there's been 3 replies to my comment. I thought, okay, a couple of them were from years ago. I just didn't check. And this one person says, well, no, I'm going to disagree with you, because both lineages, if you read Genesis 6, both lineages got wiped out, and God had to start over. Like, how's that possible? What about Noah? What about the ark? That godly lineage survived the ark. You don't just get to start over. So anyway, long backstory behind that. But people don't think these things through. And I commented, I replied to them, and I said, that doesn't make any sense, kind of in the nicest possible way. I said, that doesn't make any sense. Do you know what you're saying? God didn't just wipe everybody out. There was Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and 3 wives. Do you have something?
Yeah, just chasing that rabbit.
Yeah.
In the Gospels, the genealogy of Jesus, that race that was wiped out is centered there, the lineage of Jesus.
Yeah.
So apparently it wasn't wiped out.
Yeah. I mean, that's, who knows? It could be a cat typing on a keyboard for all I know. I don't, keyboard warriors is what we call them. They're strong behind the keyboard, but in person they kind of melt. But anyway, so what I've noticed is that during the end, kind of toward the end of each time frame, let's just say evil looks like it's starting to abound and starting to win. And that's when God has to step in and he rescues the remnant in order to keep his promises. And so this is known as, the Bible puts it as God waits till the fullness of time, is really what that term is. In other words, when the time is just right before stepping in to make a change. Well, all 3 time frames share these traits in common. These are the 5 things that I noticed. All 3 time frames share these 5 things. Things have gotten really bad enough that it threatens the very existence or perpetuity of the godly lineage. Number 2, God announces what he intends to do to whomever will listen through his representatives on earth. Number 3, God gives time for humanity to change their mind and repent. Number 4, God's attempts are ignored by the vast majority and they continue on like nothing will change. But the warnings are believed on and acted upon by what? A minority. Not the majority, a minority. And finally, God brings in the change that he promised to bring in, just like he promised. And so that's what I see. Now you can take that template and we're going to look at how that's been played out. And so when the godly institution is in danger of going out of existence, God has always stepped in and rescued it. What are the 3 time frames? The one I have listed, the first is the flood, Genesis chapter 6. The second one is the opening up of the covenant to the Gentiles. And the third is Jesus coming back after shortening the days of the tribulation. Those are the 3. Those are the 3 time frames we're looking at. So the covenant blessing always came through these 3 saving entities. And nothing was able to prevail against it. What's the first saving entity, if you will? Physically. The ark, right? Unless you were on that ark, you were flooded and wiped out. What's the second saving entity? The nation of Israel, right? Believing and conforming to their laws, being, obviously a born Israelite, but also others that wanted to join them. We looked at that recently too. That's God's saving entity for the second one. What's the third saving entity? Church, right? That's what I'm saying. We're in the third one right now. So the covenant blessing always came through these three saving entities, and nothing was able to prevail against it. That's another part of this. Not the floodwaters to wipe out all of man, not the conquering nations against Israel to wipe out his people, and not even the gates of hell or even the Antichrist to wipe out all of the New Testament saints. None of that will ever happen. So toward the end of these things get really bad. And it looks like, okay, well, Israel's going to get wiped out by Babylon or Rome or, Assyria or whatever other nation, Egypt, whatever. Well, it didn't happen, right? And then when Jesus showed up, Rome was on the scene. Rome had pretty much given Israel the autonomy, said, okay, just pay your taxes and we'll leave you alone, right? So they were there. With Noah, things got pretty bad. We're going to see that. But God preserved a remnant. And in the end, the tribulation period, things will get pretty bad too. But God will preserve a remnant as well. So that's how I see this. If you want to boil it all down, the three time frames that we're in. And so we're going to look at the first one with what time we have left. No. You're up next Sunday. Looking forward to what you have. So the first one is the flood. And let's go over to some of these we're going to go over to and read. So let's go over to Genesis chapter 6. I hope this makes sense. This is how I understand things. I'm kind of trapped in the way that I learn. I don't know why. My saying I say to myself is, if I don't know everything, I don't know anything. So I try to study something, and believe me, I don't know everything, and no one knows everything. Put that caveat out there. But my thing is that I have to know a lot about stuff in order for me to feel like I understand it. And so this is how I see these things happening. I hope that I'm coming across and you can understand that. So the flood, let's take a look at the condition. Remember, so the condition has to be that things are getting bad in order, in this first time frame we'll take a look at. And so the idea is that we'll see the common thread is that things have gotten bad and God has to step in. So in chapter 6, verse 1, it says, "Now it came to pass when men began to multiply in the face of the earth." That's a good thing, by the way. What did he say to Adam and Eve? Be fruitful and multiply. We want, have kids, and they have kids, and so forth and so on. So that's a good thing, right? And daughters were born to them. It says, they really started to multiply. It says that the sons of God, so this godly lineage that we're talking about, the ones that we read about all through the scriptures, have stayed separate. They're not mixing with the world. They're not pleasing the world. They're trying to please God. That they saw the daughters of men. And so the daughters of men, they are represented by that ungodly lineage who, they don't care about the things of God. It says, and that they were beautiful. So these daughters were beautiful. And it says, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. So there wasn't any separation anymore. We talked about separation a second ago, but there wasn't the separation anymore. That separation is collapsing. And so now we have mixing of the two lines, if you will. And the Lord said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, for he is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants on the earth in those days, men of reputation, you could say. And also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown." They had, the stature could be, it could be physical, but like was discussed recently, it could be that they were, these two bloodlines had finally merged, and it's like, wow, you're one of those guys, as it were, right? Men of renown, people that had a reputation, if you will. That's not really the focus here. It says, "Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." That sounds like a scary place to be. We've seen what terrorism does. We've seen what, murder does. I was on a marathon of, for months of forensic files. Okay. Just some nasty stuff. I had to quit watching it, just like this, some bad stuff. The things people think of and act upon, and it's just bad. But I can't imagine an entire earth being consumed with those things, murder and just some bad stuff. And so that's what the earth was getting to, the point of wickedness every intent of the thought of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. We looked at that recently. That means just to kind of sigh, like, that's kind of like you had a bad day at work or something, right? I mean, you kind of let that sigh out. So the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, creeping thing and birds of the air, for I am sorry that I have made them. Things got pretty bad. But we talked about how there's always a remnant. There's always those that don't go along with the world. And in verse 8 it says, but Noah found grace in the eyes of God. Did it come down to one family out of millions of people? I think it did. So it says, verse 9, it says, this is the genealogy of Noah. Noah was a just man, perfect in his generations. Noah walked with God. And Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all the flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. So what's God going to do about it? Well, verse 13, it says, and God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch. And this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, its height 30 cubits. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door of the ark on its side. And you shall make it with the lower, second, and third decks. And behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you and your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. There's the saving grace, right? Noah found grace in the eyes of God. Noah pleased God. Noah didn't intermarry with the daughters of men, as it were. He kept his bloodline pure. He was perfect before God. Just means complete. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't sinless. But he walked with God. And so what did God do? He rewarded that by putting him in the ark and saving him and his family. So when God accepted worship from mankind in general, this is that first time frame that we're talking about, is from Adam until this moment at the flood. He accepted worship from mankind. Anybody who wants to worship me can do that. Is free to do that. Obviously, there's conditions. Cain found that out, that there's conditions. Cain brought his offering of fruit, and his brother Abel brought his offering from the flock. Abel's offering was accepted. Cain's offering was not. So there's already right there in that very first account, there's acceptable worship and there's not acceptable worship. And so this is that first time frame we're talking about. Well, his people, also known as here in chapter 6, the sons of God, intermarried with the daughters of men. This polluted the righteous bloodline, right? And all these people mixing and everything, and led to Noah and his family being the only righteous people left on earth. The earth had grown very corrupt and violent, and if God just let things play out, the godly seed would have surely disappeared. In addition to rampant violence, Jesus tells us that mankind was busy doing things like they'd always did. This is part of what happens just before a big change when God steps in and intervenes. Let's go over to Matthew 24 pretty quickly here. And so what does Jesus have to say about this time frame? We talked recently about sometimes it's not about rampant violence. Sometimes it's just apathy. Sometimes it's just people not caring. People thinking that things are going to go along just as they've always done. And that's another key ingredient to these time frames. Just before this flood, people thought the earth was just going to keep going as is. Just before Israel thought they were going to be, the only nation with God, and they're the chosen people forever. That changed, right? And just when the elect, in Revelation we look at, just when God's people are about to be wiped out, if you will, Jesus has to come back. So that's part of this time frame here. So in Matthew 24, verse 37, Jesus says, "But as the days of Noah were, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be." That's an interesting statement. Well, what aspect of the days of Noah is Jesus talking about? Because he's talking about a date that was thousands of years prior to that moment, and he's talking about a time frame yet thousands of years in the future. So how would he know that, right? Well, he knows it. And so he's comparing the two events, and the earth will be doing what at the time? How are those connected? He says, for as in the days before the flood, what were they doing? They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were giving in marriage. It sounds like life is normal to me. That's what people do these days. We eat, people get married. You're just living life. And that's really what it's all about, right? They didn't know that everything would change suddenly. And so he says, giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered the ark. It says, and they did not know until the flood came and took them all away. So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. What does that mean? It means that people are going to be unaware of this massive change when the time frame is up. That's really what it means. That pre-flood world, there was a date on the calendar that God knew about, said, that's it. Now, that's not to say that there weren't warnings, that God's not unjust to do that. What does it say? It says he appeared to Noah to tell him to build an ark. For when you're building a boat that big on dry land, you're going to get questions from everybody. Say, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? For 100 years, it took him to build that boat. And for 100 years, just the very existence of him doing it, the faithfulness to do it every day, the questions that he answered, the Bible calls Noah a preacher of righteousness. That right there was a witness to people to say something like whatever he's saying, that might happen. But it might not. And nobody other than Noah and his family was on that boat the day that it happened. So what does that tell me? It tells me that at large, people ignored the warning. That's what it tells me. And they went about their daily lives. Fast forward to our time. We don't know when Christ will come back, but we do know that when he does, just before, people will be getting married, they'll be eating and drinking, they will be unaware or unbelieving, more like it, that it will happen, right? And I always think about that first raindrop, that plop that happened at Noah's day. Completely unexpected, unbelievable. Nobody saw that coming, right? Unless you were Noah and his family who believed God. And so that's part of this idea of the time frame. Well, let's go to the second time frame, the condition of Israel and also the covenant with the Gentiles. I know this is some pretty heavy stuff, but this is good stuff. All right, let's go to Isaiah 65. We talked about Noah. We talked about the time frame before the flood. We talked about it shortly after the flood. Let's go to 65. Let's just look at verse 1 through 7. So Israel, you can imagine being God's people, freed from Egypt in a mighty way, with Pharaoh freed from Egypt with the 10 plagues, inheriting the promised land and fighting for it and all this other stuff. So now they're in the Middle East, in their nation, and they're able to, they had good years, they had bad years, they had good kings, they had bad kings, so forth and so on. But overall, Israel disappointed God. And there's problems. And so what's this question here? Isaiah asks him God in chapter 64, like, what's our future look like with you? What does he say in 65? He says, I was sought by those who did not ask for me. I was found by those who did not seek me. As in, I'm sorry, Israel, but your time's up. I'm not going to work with you anymore. Now, there's a lot to this, and I'm glazing over it, right? But as a nation, God changed the way that he accepted worship. It was through the priesthood, it was through Israel, it was through all animal sacrifice, all that stuff in the second time frame was the nation of Israel. Started off by Abraham and his bloodline, his descendants. And they thought they would just continue on like that forever. But because of their disobedience, God said, no, I'm cutting that off. And so verse 2, it says, I have stretched out my hands all day long to a rebellious people. That's Israel. He says, who walk in a way that is not good, according to their own thoughts, a people who provoke me to anger continually to my face, who sacrifice in gardens and burn incense on altars of brick, so forth and so on. What does this sound like? To me, it sounds like the ones who pre-flood were rampant violence, were turning their back on God, were doing all the bad things. And God said, okay, time frame's up. I'm going to end this, and I'm going to start something new. And so he ended it with Israel. We don't have to go to all these verses, but he ends it with Israel, and he begins it through Christ with his church. He founded his church when Jesus came.
Brother Andrew, you mentioned that Noah was a picture of righteousness in his generation, and then you also mentioned that God gives warnings. He doesn't just bring the hammer down. He says ahead of time, this is what's going to happen, giving people a chance to listen to him.
Yes, absolutely.
The prophets were like Noah. They were the Noahs of Israel's day. There were several of them. And they were scattered from the northern area, the southern area. There were, when Israel was scattered over in Babylon, there were prophets there. And so they were everywhere. The warnings were everywhere.
Yeah. Well, and God's merciful. We looked at that in the devotion, right? God's merciful. The scripture says he wants everybody to be saved. So it's not like he wants anyone. I mean, it pained him. It said it grieved God at the flood to do that. It grieved him. And so he was grieved with Israel. There was so many, and we, even in Matthew 23, we've looked at that multiple times. Jesus looks over Israel and says, "See, your house is left to you desolate." I'm going to have to pull the plug on this time frame. If you want to use a term from today's lesson, I'm pulling the plug on it. He says, "For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." But before that, he said, "I wish I could gather you like a hen gathers her chicks under her wing." That's the amount of love that God had. But that was rejected upon, right? That was those people at the flood time saying, "No, I'm living my life. I'm doing what I want, and it's going to be rebellious." God says, "I'm sorry, I have to deal with that." And it grieved him. And in this time, he says, "I wish I could do that." That's that regret. I wish things were different. I wish you would just accept it. But now I have to pull that authority away from you, Israel. We're going a different way. And it's through the church. And so that's the second time frame. And finally, to wrap this up, those time frames for us are in the past. One was several thousand years ago. The second one was about 2,000 years ago. The next one, we don't know. But we do know that it's in the scriptures and we do believe it. And that's the second coming. So in let's go to Matthew 16. Let's read those scriptures there. We've been there. Like I said, a lot of these scriptures we've been hitting lately. And I always seem to read a scripture that Pastor Easton reads up here for his message. I don't know. Do I apologize for that? Or I don't know what to do. I think it just reinforces things. That's what I think. I think it's a good thing. So Matthew 16, let's now look at the third time frame that we're in. When Jesus came, he called out certain disciples, certain men to say, "You're going to be part of this first church." And then when he left, when he ascended, there was only about 120 people. Jesus preached to tens of thousands of people during his ministry, and at the end was only 120 that gathered. One thing that shouldn't be missed in this is that God never cared about numbers of people. He cares about keeping, the way. He cares more about the qualifications and the standard of serving him more than the numbers of people who might or might not do it. He cares more about that. And so here, and my point with that is that we're going to see this, chapter 16, verse 13. It says, when Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, he's kind of curious now. At some point in life, you kind of figure that someone's along far enough. And I was asked to spy on someone at work years ago because the bosses could tell she wasn't getting it, right? Like there was questions and everything. I said, Andy, every question that she asks you, I want you to document in a Word document and then share it with us. I kind of felt like I was betraying her a little bit because we were friends. But the bosses felt that by month 1, month 2, month 3, that she should be further along by then. And so they were holding her to more of accountability at month 3 and month 4 than they were at week 1. It's okay to ask those questions at week 1. Everyone has newbie questions when you start a job. But they were starting to see that she was asking those same questions at month 4 and month 5. And so they asked me, it says, you sit next to her, can you just, if she leans over to ask you a question, Can you just write that down? And we want to know how far she's progressing. I said, sure. I don't like it, but I got to do it. So I wrote down the questions, and thankfully the situation resolved itself, because the day that she was going to get let go, she went into the office and said, I found another job. So completely, great things happened. It just wasn't her thing. I mean, IT is not for everybody. But the point is that Jesus now has walked with his disciples. They've seen miracles. They've heard him teach. And so there's a certain expectation now from his disciples, the ones that are the closest to him, that they should maybe have a different perspective on him than the world. Let's see how far you've come in these couple of years and how much training you've got. Okay, so he turns around one day and he asks his disciples, which there were 12 of them, right? He says, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? Give me the take that you've heard about everybody else. When you've heard, people come up to you, private conversations, or shouting from the crowd, or interviews, or whatever. Who does everybody else say that I am? That's what he's asking. Well, so they said, they had a lot of answers. So they said, some say John the Baptist, some say Elijah, and others, Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. You know what's interesting about that? They were all dead. So the crowds were willing to believe that somebody had died hundreds of years prior, was resurrected, and was standing before them teaching. They were willing to believe that, because those men are dead. What does he say? By the way, you ask 1,000 different people about God, about religion, you'll get 1,000 different answers. YouTube has taught me that, okay? And I already knew that. But I'm saying YouTube has reinforced that, and the internet at large. Everybody's got an opinion about everything. And that's fine, because we have a free will. But Jesus wasn't so much interested in what other people say, what other people think about him. What does he ask now? He says, but who do you say that I am? He wants to know the ones who have been the closest to him. What's your opinion? What do you think? Well, Simon Peter answered and said, you are the Christ, the Son of God. That was his perspective, being closer to God. So there's a certain expectation when we walk with God longer that we can understand who he is better. And by the way, that expectation goes not just from our perspective, but that expectation is put on us as well. So there's an expectation that we'll know who God is. And it doesn't matter what the crowds and what the world says God is. We know who God is. He's been revealed to us through the scriptures. That's the difference. That's the part of this time frame, is that there are some who understand who God is, and they're not guessing about, is he John the Baptist? Is he Elijah? Is he this? Is he the brother of Satan? Is he just a prophet? Is he a spirit that never had a body? I mean, you have all these different theories. Every one of those I just said are people actually like that's a take. I'm not making that up. Like you get like I said, ask 1,000 people, you get 1,000 different responses. But he wanted to know what their opinion was. And Jesus answered, and he said, after he correctly said that he's the Christ, the Son of the living God, Jesus answered and said to him, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock, I believe he's pointing to himself, Jesus is pointing to himself, this rock I will build my church. There's that third time frame, the church. And the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. First time frame, to be saved through that flood, where'd you have to be? The ark. Second time frame, where'd you have to be? One of the Israelites, right? Or a proselyte, which means that you were not born Israel, but you came into the covenant, right? Third one, we just read it, it's the church. And so can we accept Jesus as our Savior outside of the church? Absolutely. Can you do it at your home? Can you watch a televangelist and accept Christ in your heart? Yes, and we hope that you do. But at the same time, the saving place, to save fully, you have to be in the church. That's what Jesus says. He says that the keys of the kingdom of heaven are with the church. And so that's the third and final time frame that we're in. is the church age.
Brother Andrew,
Mhm.
tie that in. The church to people today, to this generation today, is what the ark was in Noah's day, and
Right.
in that generation.
Yeah.
Okay? So the spiritual ark today, where people need to get on board and get safely inside that ark,
Yeah.
is the New Testament church.
Right.
And Peter, the Apostle Peter, says this and emphasizes, ties Noah's situation with Noah to baptism, which is the key to the church's salvation by grace, and then baptism. So it's the ark today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it doesn't save people from hell, but it saves them from the floodwaters, as it were, from the danger of disobeying God.
Right. And being outside the ark, as it were. So there's scriptures I have here that I'll just reference. I'm not really going to read them, but they're basically saying that just as there was deception and in the Noah's day, there was all sorts of deception going on in the land of the Israelites. God says, don't learn their ways, don't intermarry with them, don't bow down to their idols, and all this other stuff. Stay separate is what he's saying. Well, in the third one, there's also deception. There's also in Jude, he talks about certain men have crept in unnoticed long ago. They want to deceive you. They want to fill you with false doctrine. Peter talks about there's false prophets among the people. There's going to be false prophets among you. So there's always that opposition to this godly way, always. In every time frame, there has been. But I'll wrap it up with Matthew 24. I'll just read this. We talk about how just before this time frame ends, and God has already predicted it and said this is what's going to happen. Who's on board? Who's going to listen? Well, the people at the flood, there was only 8 inside that ark. The Israelites, 120 to form that new church, right? A minuscule amount right, when that time frame ended. What about when the next time frame ends? In Matthew 24, Jesus is talking about prophecy of yet future. He says, "For then, in the future, there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time." As in, we're heading for a major, major catastrophe in the world. It is coming. And so that's, it's going to be the worst than it has ever been up till this time. He says, no, nor shall ever be. There's not going to be a time like it after that. He says, and unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. You could say that if God would have just continued to let man at the flood just continue on without saving it, Noah and his family would have been wiped out. You could say that if God wouldn't have interrupted Israel and gone to the Gentiles and closed out that time frame, then the Israelites would have gone to completely obliterated, as it were, false doctrine, and they were heading that way. That whole lineage would have gone out. And in the future, if God doesn't intervene in this nasty time for his people, they would be wiped out as well. But in each time frame, God has grace and says, whoever wants to jump on board, let's go. Save yourselves from this crooked and perverse generation, is what he says. So I hope that that's us today. And, my goal for myself is to do that. I hope that that's your goal as well. So that's all I have. Anybody have anything else? Sorry, that was kind of a lot. Hopefully Brother Easton will take us through something a little lighter. So, all right. Let's go ahead and stand.